Today's interview is with Charlie Rodman. He's the chief marketing officer for one of the best spirits investors out there, No Sleep Beverage. One of the things I'm really excited about for interviewing Charlie is that, as you know, I'm a finance nerd. I love the metrics. I love gross margin and velocity. But if that was all there was to spirits investing, an AI could do it way better than me. This is a product that is 3,000 years old, and it has history, and consumers engage with it with more ways than just their wallet. They believe in brands. They love the taste. And Charlie is the best student I know of the history of alcohol, of the nuances of production, of the taste, and understanding what separates a brand, understanding a consumer, understanding how they look at and engage with alcohol, what it means for them socially and beyond that. And then eventually how that shows up in the numbers and how they can pick the brands they're going to be set apart. So without further ado, let's jump into the interview.
Thank you so much for having me on. This is going to be fun.
If you would, Mike, could you give us just a quick 30-second rundown on No Sleep, what y'all do, what you're about, what stage you're in?
Yeah, absolutely. So No Sleep Beverage, I've been part of the team here for a little over a year at this point. I'm our CMO. So like you said, going to get into a little bit more on the branding and marketing side with me today. But No Sleep Beverage is maybe a little bit different from some of the other guests that you're having on. I imagine like everyone who comes on, we say that we are a value add strategic venture capital firm. And I also imagine like every fund that comes on here, we say we mean it. You know, we're different. We really mean it. No, I actually do think that we are a little bit different in that we both have our investment arm, the venture side, and then we have what we call our studio side of the business, which offers consultative services. So while we do principally invest in brands that we think have a high likelihood of success, we bring the background that each of the three of us have with, I think I'm the least tenured person with a decade of experience in the spirits industry, working directly alongside our entrepreneurs. And that's not a quarterly board call. That's not a monthly pick up the phone and chat. In the case of some of our brands, I'm operating as their fractional chief marketing officer. David, our CFO and CIO, is operating as their fractional CFO and handling their books. Nick manages high-level strategy alongside their CEOs. These are daily, weekly calls that we're having with our entrepreneurs to help guide their strategy. So while the overarching level of this business is a VC fund, we also very much want to work alongside the entrepreneur to maximize the likelihood of that success as we see it.
And so what's your background? You mentioned the time in spirits, what you did before. What got you here, and how'd you end up at No Sleep?
It's a funny story. It's one of those just actually a couple different serendipitous occasions along the way. So I started my career in finance out of college, quite quickly realized it wasn't for me. I wanted something that was a little bit more consumer facing, and ended up switching to strategy consulting. The focus that I specialized in was on customer segmentation, path to purchase, consumer decision journey, audience modeling. The first client that I had meaningful client management responsibilities for after I'd been consulting for a while was Diageo. And I was the kind of person who, if I get interested in something, I dive way head first into the deep end. And over the 6 months of that engagement, not billed back to the client, not billed back to the business, just on my own dime, I'd gone out and bought over 120 bottles of spirits in 6 months to go learn everything I could. If I wrote a case study on a brand, I went to the store across the street and bought it. If I was learning about a category that I had to talk to Diageo about, went to a liquor store, talked to the rep, and bent their ear for 20, 30 minutes. I have to give a shout out here to Gramercy Wine and Spirits in New York City. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't know jack about this industry, because they spent many, many hours teaching me. If anyone listening ever happens to be in Charlotte and wants to try some really good stuff, my door is open. I love sharing good drinks with good people. Back to how I got here. Yeah, so I think you can hopefully hear a little bit of the nerdiness and the extreme passion that developed from that first engagement with Diageo, which turned into a series of ongoing engagements with them where I was leading part of that relationship. I actually started a whiskey blog, which most people would not know because I never put my face on it. I never put my name on it, but it grew to several thousand followers on social media, even though it was like long form reviews. I never followed anybody. I wasn't trying to take any free product at any point. It was just a way to hold myself accountable for learning and trying things. Eventually was recruited to Pernod Ricard to help them reorient their U.S. marketing around consumer-centric marketing practices. So I've kind of continued on that consumer insights, data-oriented brand building, and helped integrate that culture in Pernod Ricard, ultimately being promoted to their head of strategy and insights for their premium whiskey portfolio. Everything up to that point in my career had been consumer-oriented. And I learned quite importantly that in this industry, in this country, it's not sufficient to be a consumer-oriented marketer. Your consumer is not your customer if you're working at the supplier tier. You have to go through the 3-tier system. You have to sell to a distributor. And ultimately, the person that you're designing selling programs for has to be this nice mix, this push and pull of how am I designing for a consumer, the person who's going to drink the product, and how do I build a brand for that person, versus how do I develop programs and how do I get a distributor, the person who I'm actually selling to, excited about the product.
Yeah, a customer will never see it unless a distributor buys it. But a distributor only buys it because they think customers will buy it. And what they think customers will buy might be different than what customers will buy or what we think they will.
Exactly. And that's a bit of the whole dance, right? Is how do you actually build something that the consumer is going to want? And how do you prove that model when, especially if you're working with a smaller brand, there isn't the background, right? If you're Glenlivet, a distributor is going to be thrilled to pick you up because you're the number one selling single malt scotch in America. If you're, if you're Glen Talkers, a different brand in the Pernod Ricard portfolio, even if you've got the weight of Pernod Ricard behind you, I don't know how excited that distributor is going to be because the consumer's never heard of it. The value proposition isn't clear. Why are they going to pick that instead of your Glenlivet off the shelf, right? So I left Pernod Ricard. I went and worked for a company called Total Beverage Solution. They're actually at the import tier. So while we talk about the 3-tier system, if you're a foreign brand, there's actually a 4th tier. You have to come in through an importer who then sells to a distributor on behalf of a supplier, and worked as their director of strategy across their beer, wine, and spirits portfolio, but predominantly focused on the spirit side. Call that getting my MBA in spirits commercialization. If you're bringing products in, you have to figure out palletization, unit quantities. You got to figure out your freight routes, consolidations. We worked with somewhere between 300 and 350 different distributors across all 50 states. Had to design programs across the board for mom and pops up to Southern, right? So everyone thinks about Southern RNDC breakthrough. That's about 70% of the volume, 70% plus of the volume that gets sold in the US. There's hundreds of other small distributors, and we worked with just about all of them. Mm-hmm. Really, like I said, the MBA approach got really deep on the commercialization side. And from there was recruited to a startup in the tech space. So idea was we partnered with a supplier. They paid us a marketing fee. We would run programmatic ads and develop a lot of content, do interviews with their distillers, do virtual tours of their distilleries, coming out of COVID again, right? All of those at-home drinking experiences that people were having. And we'd send them, say, an American single malt kit where they would get about an hour to an hour and a half of content on, in that case, it was 6 different distilleries, 10 different products, videos on how each one was made, what made each distillery different, interviews with the distillers. You got deep on each of the products, and they got to sample it. So brand building.
Recreating the distillery tour experience
Bingo.
To the extent you could.
Exactly. And giving them the benefit of a sampling that wasn't directed to, this is Mary walking into Joe Schmo's Liquor on a Tuesday afternoon. This is someone who's been doing a search for American single malt, and now you're getting these brands right into their hands with all of the brand building assets that go behind it. Mm-hmm. Pretty smart, really exciting. And I got the startup bug coming out of that. So I actually started my own spirits consultancy, and this is where serendipitous moment number 2 happens. Nick was the head of M&A at Pernod Ricard's new brand ventures. He's the CEO of No Sleep Beverage. He, I guess, has a mutual contact with my brother, and my brother just happened to be in the car, overheard his friend who was finishing up a call with someone who was investing in spirits. Turned out to be Nick. I got Nick's contact info. we got lunch. We realized we were both at Pernod at the same time. We realized we had a lot of similar perspectives on the industry. Started doing a little bit of consulting, then a lot of consulting, then started working full time, and now I'm leading marketing for No Sleep Beverage.
Awesome. Those are the best relationship situation. I think it happens more commonly in the spirits world because it's a small world. You rarely don't meet people who overlap together at Diageo or at Pernod or some of these big companies. Most people kind of cut their chops there, and you just have this kind of camaraderie, even if it's a little bit of rivalry in the same way you'd have like a big team.
It's funny, we realized while we were at Pernod, we were probably in the same room at the same time at least a dozen times, in the same meetings, just at different ends of the table, and never had the chance to meet. And then, now we're two parts of a three-man team.
On the investing side, now as a part of No Sleep, I'm a finance nerd. That's what I focus in on. I love the metrics, gross margin, velocity. As from your new seat as an investor, what else is it really important to understand when looking at brands, to know what's healthy, what's not, what gets you excited, out off of the paper, so to speak?
Yeah, I think one of the things that is core to No Sleep Beverage is we look for what we call transcendent brands. And I realize that sounds very fluffy, particularly to a finance nerd. In our view, one of the magical things about the alcohol category and the spirits category is how a drink can transcend a place or a moment. And I think the easiest way people can relate to this, just given how pervasive and long-lasting the marketing is, can you think of Corona and not think of a beach? Right? Like, just having, whether you're in Denver in January or you're in Mexico in May, if you have a Corona in your mind, they're trying to put you somewhere on a beach. And the idea that you can get out of your place, you can get brought into a particular moment, you can, most importantly, see a different culture. And that's where the name No Sleep Beverage comes from, keeping our eyes open for the opportunity to step out of our shoes and experience culture from someone else's perspective through the drinks industry, is really important to the brands that we look at. And I realize that's a little bit ephemeral, but we try and figure out what is the cultural resonance that this brand has. And for us, culture doesn't necessarily mean geographic culture or heritage, but it can also be how do they tap into cultural touchstones. And I think maybe the easiest example from the portfolio to talk about is Salento Tequila, which is a tequila that's focused on, their tagline is "Take it slow." And it's built from a group of surfers whose mindset was that flow state they get when they're surfing and they feel connected with nature and the whole world is slowing down around them, and the magic of being out there with friends and those moments on the beach. Can they recreate that in drinks occasions? And can they kind of invert the expectations of tequila, which has for so long been going after high energy shot occasions, and make it instead a drink that's really smooth, really easy drinking, really just kind of viscous and rich and lush and much more approachable, so that you want to sit and sip and savor it and enjoy those moments and really just connect around the bottle. And for us, that is a form of culture, right? Encapsulating that flow state you get through surfing and being with people and those moments and those nights that you don't want to end, so you can slow them down and just enjoy them. That's an example of how we look at culture and something that goes beyond what you can find on a spreadsheet.
Yeah, that's it. I fight against that because as the numbers guy, I want to believe that's where the magic is. But the reality is that, computers could do it if it was just a numbers. If it was just about this, anybody could ultimately solve for it if they had the right equation. And the fluffiness, the transcendence, the understanding people, understanding the way a consumer is thinking about it, understanding what they buy into. There's a kind of a in vogue word, occasion based. We don't want to be the whiskey market share. We want occasion market share. Well, Corona is a great example. You could make money if someone buys your product every time they go to the beach. You could make a lot of money if you make someone buys your product every time you want to go to the beach.
Exactly.
Or want to feel like you're at the beach or want to replicate it. I mean, it's just obviously has had power on the scale of billions. And so it is that fluffy stuff that ultimately makes the difference in IRR, and it all ties back, and you're going to see the fluffy stuff in the numbers, and the numbers are going to, drive those things. And so I'm glad that there are people like you in the world, and it's important to find that out.
I said it as part of my background with consumer centric marketing, right? And that's what it all comes down to. For every brand we work with, we try and figure out what is the consumer insight or the consumer need state that this brand can resolve for. And there is a lot of overlap between occasion based marketing and occasion based segmentation and identifying what that consumer need state is, or the Clayton Christensen needs to be done, jobs to be done model of brand building. And I think if you can start with that and you can easily communicate to a consumer what job this product fulfills for them, what need it fulfills for them, what is the challenge that is currently unfulfilled by the products in the market or that you can fulfill better and more organically in a consumer's mind, the easier you're going to be able to own that spot. And when they're trying to replicate that moment, when they're trying to replicate that sense, if they're feeling in that right mood or that occasion, then you're going to be the top of mind brand in your category when that's the kind of drink they want.
How do you evaluate some of those things, some of the cultural pieces? I mean, are you doing studies of hundreds of people of what do you want? I mean, where's the data? Where's the discovery? How do you follow and lock onto these trends of what people want? Like, how do you know the consumer wants that surfer, slow tequila vibe, like that you can connect with?
There's a lot of quantitative research that can go into it if you have access. A lot of the time that's very expensive. So that's more like the Pernod Ricard lane. And there's a lot of qualitative stuff you can do or something that maybe straddles the line a little bit of both, but through a lot of desk research and identifying trends and finding the publicly available data on what is moving in categories, and you look at the brands and you look at their positioning, and almost the way if you're looking at like medical research, how they do meta-analyses where they look across all of these studies and derive implications. Obviously that's much more quantitative, but you can do something similar here where you're looking at what are all of the behaviors that are getting captured. If you're looking at brands that are seeing growth or categories that are seeing growth, and then you dive down into where is the share actually coming from, what price tiers, what subcategories of product. Is it, if we're comparing with beer, pretty easy to track where the craft movement was coming from if you were looking 10, 15 years ago, even if you were just looking at the types of beers that were selling, moving away from light beer and light beer losing share, right? Even if you took brand out of all of that, you could see a shift coming down the road of what types of brands consumers would preference. That's a little bit different from positioning because we're still talking about liquid formulation, but it can lever up into a broader macro trend like that if you kind of know how to puzzle the different pieces together.
Of the things that a consumer could look at, which is maybe the production quality, is it additive free? Is it aged 8 years? Like maybe that side of the spectrum. To the other side of the spectrum, which does it feel like you're, caught in a wave? For the modern consumer, where do you think that it's moving? Where do you think that good brands are focusing?
It's both, but I think the truth of the matter is no one's going to know your additive-free, organic, God's gift if they're not interested in looking at the product. You're going to have to read a product label before you get there. And people's subconscious pays a lot more attention to form, color, shape, just all that kind of stuff before they even read what's on the label. So step one is getting them to pay attention, and you need to either have if it's on shelf, you need to have a pack that's really attractive, or if it's in digital marketing or a billboard or whatever, you need to have an aesthetic that fits the occasion you're trying to solve for, that fits the package you're trying to build, that fits the need you're trying to solve, and that sort of subconsciously, intrinsically communicates that need so that they do take the 5-10 seconds to stop and read your brand story, or they do read the formulation label, or they do see where the product is made and read that fine print, whether it's distilled in your distillery or whether it's sourced. And I don't mean that in any way as a negative. I think that consumers are becoming much more attenuated to the fact that a lot of the spirits they drink are sourced. But as that seesaw swings in favor of people recognizing that, they're also asking more. It's not enough just to buy MGP and put a label on it and make up a story. They want you to do what Smooth Ambler or what High West got famous for, where they picked great barrels and then they put them through their process, or they aged them on site at their warehouse, or whatever it is that actually puts the unique fingerprints on it, so it's not just dill pickle MGP rye number 729.
Yeah, I mean, the discovery of contract production blew me away at first. I just couldn't believe it. I felt so betrayed. And then I had this kind of full circle resurgence. It's like, I don't care. I care about the quality of the product, I care about brands that I believe in, what they do to get it in front of me. But there is now an awareness of, if I like this whiskey, is there another brand that I can buy it for cheaper if it's just MGP whiskey? Or if I'm going to pay a premium to the cheapest MGP Bardstown I can get, why am I paying that premium? What is it doing to earn that premium over contract? And you get into tequila and it's all sourced, it's like, it was this bad word in whiskey, and that's the reality in tequila, that all these noms cover it. And so just, yeah, that nuance of it and how the consumer understands it, I mean, changes so much.
And if you go talk to the nerdiest of the single malt Scotch nerds, of whom I am one, the history of single malt Scotch is sourced whiskey. And it's through a separate lane of the industry called independent bottlers, who buy barrels from the distillery and put it in their own packaging with their own labels.
It's fascinating, that you get to a gotcha and then you realize that it's the historical standard. And I like to become a snob. I trend towards wanting to be a snob. Same thing happened with coffee. You get in deeper and you come back to, hey, if you love your Keurig cup, if you love your Dunkin' Donuts, if it's providing the use case, the value case, the job to be done, like, good for you. You're not, lesser. There's still a single origin Ethiopian pour over. It costs $9 that's worth it. And just knowing what's important and kind of looking at brands that way.
Yeah, I think hopefully I can come across more as a nerd than a snob. I don't turn my nose up. I'm happy to go drink an Evan Williams, and I'll often just order an Evan Williams neat at a bar. Like, It's funny, I very rarely will order something in like the mid tier. It's like, I'm either just going to play value and I'm going to find a bunch of stuff that I like and I'll feel like I got a great deal on it, or I'm going to try something that's like awesome and I'm really excited about, or I've never tried before and I'm going to nerd out on it.
I pride myself in being able to eat Whataburger and a Michelin star. Like, they can exist separately. They can provide a use case. And I would rather do one of the two than do something that's in the middle, kind of like a pretty expensive, but not the best it can be, but not as practical and not as fulfilling. And so brands can be the same way.
You are so Texas. What a burger.
I mean, yeah. If you couldn't tell from Bubba and the oil and gas background and the mustache, you just have to listen to me for 5 seconds. So what are some trends that you're paying attention to right now? What are you seeing, either categories or occasions or kind of newer generations? Like, what are you seeing show up?
Yeah, there's lots of stuff I think we need to be paying attention to and we need to be wise to. And I think there's some things that we at No Sleep Beverage really buy into as having lasting value. And I think there's some that we look at and we say, is that really more of a fad than a trend? I'll start with premiumization, just because that's one that's been going on for a long time. It seems like that is kind of one of the top of mind drivers of the industry for probably the last 10, 15 years at this point. And started to see some press. I think Reuters a week or two had an article out about, our suppliers starting to turn the tide on premiumization. We know obviously with inflation, buyer behaviors are changing. We're looking at potential for Gen Z to be drinking less purchasing power. So we'll start with premiumization as a trend. And I actually personally still think that it has a lot of runway left to go. And we can go through that kind of level by level on what we're seeing in messaging. But let's start with the supplier tiers. I mean, we're seeing that a lot of portfolios are divesting their tail brands and they're doubling down on their more premium products without disclosing anything. We've seen some potential deals coming through that would further reinforce that trend on maybe some portfolio consolidation, but consolidating towards more premium. So that would give us a little bit of confidence on the runway from the consumer perspective. Let's start with the Gen Z point around consumers having less disposable income and having fewer drinks occasions. Absolutely correct. Gen Z is drinking less. All of the data shows it. There's a lot more cannabis, and that's maybe another trend to touch on. And if you spend time talking with Gen Z, or if you look at, say, Gen Z Reddit, there's a lot of conversation just around drinking is too expensive. Drinking can make you look too sloppy in a world where you're always liable to be on camera and share it out to the world. But focusing more just on the spend side of this to get us back to premiums. We had this same conversation happening with millennials when I was doing research for Diageo that we called the State of the Millennial Report. And it was how much of this cohort's behavior is focused on the age that they are now. And that is typical behavior for someone in the age of 21 to 28. Or how much of that is an actual meaningful change that this demographic is shifting towards. This generation has an actual psychographic different approach to alcohol. And in the case of millennials, we saw a lot of normalization as people age. They did start increasing their consumption. They did start increasing their spend. It's not as much as Gen X, but it's way more than it used to be. So as Gen Z develops more disposable income, would anticipate likely some increase in their spend towards alcohol. But let's assume even if that's not the case, and there is a lot more moderation happening. If you were, instead of having 10 drinks a week, were only going to have 3 drinks a week, you'd probably be more likely to care that each of those is a good drink rather than going for having something that's a little bit budget because you know you're going to go through the bottle pretty quickly. So that's an example of like a qualitative read that we would look at in the marketplace, where we don't have specific data that says because Gen Z is drinking less, they are buying more expensive bottles when they do drink. It's about finding those things that are worth spending on and augmenting their spend on those things and reducing spend in areas that don't matter as much emotionally for them.
And especially if the driver behind the decision to drink less is in some way driven by the healthiness of it or the pureness of it or chemicals. And, so a lot of these conversations that are out there, it tends to be the premium brands that can tell the story of, hey, we're not putting artificial chemicals into your body. So not only if you're going to only have 3 drinks, you're going to get nicer things, you're probably going to be willing to pay up. Because if you're making decisions based on principle, you're going to probably purchase on principle as well. And premium brands tend to follow that. You alluded to, I think a big conversation is these generational, age-wise drinking shifts. I've been interested recently, and I think the election showed that in a big way, that there are some pretty substantial demographic and cultural shifts that have happened in the U.S. over the last 20 years, specifically the Hispanic population and Modelo. How do you think that will influence or has been influencing types of beverages, the quantity? Like what kind of factors do you see there?
Yeah, I think the first thing, which is an awesome positive and has been seen, is the openness to trying new flavors and cross-cultural flavors. This was actually in the work that I did for Diageo over a decade ago. We looked at food as a leading indicator, and we realized how much more food fusion there was and people being willing to explore cross-cultural flavors. And we reasoned out, again, another one of these qualitative reads on quantitative data. If people are getting more familiar with the flavors that are apparent in other cultures, and coincidentally those cultures are becoming a bigger part of the population, you'd anticipate that those flavors and flavor expectations would permeate into other categories beyond food. And so we were anticipating that tequila would be one of these categories that would see a lot of rise, because you were seeing a proliferation of Mexican food restaurants, right? I think that you can see other categories as those cultures or subcultures come to actually lead culture and lead pop culture, what those communities prefer to drink or prefer to associate with their culture will then start to become more mainstream. So it could be the continuation of something like tequila or mezcal. It could be something like the rise of rum for some Central American or Caribbean communities,
or it could shoju or one of those,
exactly, or even aguardiente, or some more niche spirits that come from communities that are having a larger population growth that we're seeing. And I think there's a lot of cool stuff that can come from that, right? I'm half Swedish, so aquavit, my first spirit that I drank was aquavit when I was 7 years old. And like, if I see aquavit on a cocktail menu, I'm going to try it because it's just something that is so novel and yet so nostalgic for me. Cultural spirits like that in communities that do have a really big presence, that are really growing, and that I do think have much more of a chance because no one else is able to deliver that nostalgic just memory for them. And that has a lot of power for consumers.
Yeah, and it does. You can bring either the historic beverage, and you can just bring the flavors. So we had dear friends in Austin that were Korean, and they showed us lychee as a flavor. Like we had
Yeah.
never really experienced lychee. We had several lychee shojus, and now like when we saw a hard seltzer or a spirits-based RTD that's got a lychee flavor, like that's definitely going to get a pick over another cranberry or grapefruit one that's the option out there.
And same with yuzu, right? Like yuzu is starting to pop up everywhere as a flavor. And I think, again, talking about kind of trends and evolutions, the American palate is still phenomenally geared towards sweet, right? That we haven't broken that yet. But we are seeing a lot more interest in spice. We're seeing a lot more interest in savory flavors. Umami as a flavor that's starting to come through and be interesting to people. And that doesn't mean that someone wants a whiskey that was matured in a fish barrel. It has been tried, and it is actually part of the history of whiskey making. It sounds atrocious. Someone did try to remake that more recently, and it didn't go well. That doesn't mean that umami isn't a trending flavor, right? It's just how it actually gets packaged. What do you counterbalance it with? How do you message it? How do you create something that, as a gestalt product, offers a lot more than just what that liquid proposition is? And can you deliver on a promise that sort of surprises and delights in a way that keeps someone coming back again?
Speaking of categories that I personally have really fallen in love with and enjoy is mezcal, the growth of mezcal, the differentiation of mezcal within tequila. Saw recently on your website, your recent investment into Madre. I mean, can you tell me specifically about mezcal? What did you guys like about mezcal? Like, what drew you to this investment, to this company?
Yeah. So Mexican spirits in particular are ones that Nick, David, and myself all have a really strong affinity for. We love tequila, we love mezcal, and I think
From a cultural transcendence or from taste?
all of it, actually.
Yeah.
I think Mexican spirits have so much authenticity and heritage in the production, and it is such a natural, organic, relational spirit, particularly with mezcal and particularly with wild harvest mezcal and agave varietals, right? That's harder and harder to find, but the biodynamic aspect, the difficulty in cultivating and domesticating a lot of these agave varietals, there's just a romanticism that becomes very easy to capture in storytelling, in brand narrative, in all of that when you're working with agave as a plant and as a base ingredient for distillation. When we look at Madre in particular, it comes down to a few things. I think they actually very much take that as their brand positioning. It's around Mother Nature and reconnecting with the earth and the spiritual elements that a lot of people don't necessarily associate with mezcal or with agave. But if you really get into the history of the Mesoamerican cultures and how they treated agave and the spiritual characteristics they had associated with it and how it was ritualistically used in religious ceremonies and cultural ceremonies and moments of significance, it was very much this spiritual duality of connecting with the earth and the broader world around one. So I think the positioning very much touches on that. And then the aesthetic factor is immense with this brand. They've done such a good job in brand building and, like I said, designing that bottle that when you see it, you'll just stop and you'll look at it and go, what is that one sitting on the shelf?
Especially on the mezcal shelves, which tend to be like very authentic in nature, a white label with just a list of 100 stats on it. They really stand out in that category in a way that other brands haven't.
And what I personally love about it is it does that while still having what feels like an authentically Mexican design aesthetic, right? So they've actually looked into traditionally Mexican art and artists and sort of borrowed on the semiotics of that design philosophy to create their packaging. And it really stands out. I mean, it's talk about things you can't measure, talk about things you can't put on a spreadsheet, but it just has a cool factor. Like you look at it and you can just instantly say, that's a cool brand. That is a brand that I would want to associate with. Or if someone sees me holding that bottle, it's probably going to make me look cooler than, I don't think of myself as a particularly cool person. So I'll take all the help I can get, Madre, please.
Well, it's funny you bring up metrics when it corresponds to Madre, because long before you guys invested, I'd been a fangirl of this brand. because they do a really good job of telling their story of what their brand is doing on their channels. So on their LinkedIn, some of their leadership, they've posted different slides and stories and metrics about what they're doing. And what I can immediately see is these guys know what they're doing because they're focusing on the right metrics. They're doing things on a velocity basis. Look at the velocity of the brand compared to other brands in the category. Look at the velocity related to the number of distribution points we have. They weren't just saying, hey, we're in 26 new states. So they were drawing attention to the things that really matter, that make them acquirable, that make them show that they've got the consumer's wallet. And I guess maybe that question is, as you kind of move back from seeing these transcendent cultural things to this evaluation of should I invest or should I not invest in the brand, are there any metrics that do a better job of showing that there's a resonance or a cultural value than others, revenue, gross margin, velocity, like something that you put more weight on?
Yeah, thank you for bringing us back to the investment side. I've been stuck in my romanticized marketing brain here for a while. We also obviously chose to invest in Madre because they have phenomenal metrics. We really lean into our philosophy of deepen before you broaden. You'll see a lot of brands try and get into all 50 states right away, or they try and partner with Southern or RMDC right off the bat. And it can work, but it's not the strategy we would advise. And we saw that Madre was taking a really similar approach. If you look at those metrics they're posting on LinkedIn, a lot of those are the metrics we want to track. What is their same store velocity? What are their reorder rates looking like? What is their dollar add to every retailer that brings them in? Right? So if you look at them compared with a lot of other brands in the category, they're like the second fastest moving on a per account basis. If you are a retailer and you bring Madre in, it'll basically become your fastest or second fastest selling mezcal in your store. That's despite costing twice as much as Cuatrocientos Conejos, which is the number one brand, right? So they lag by a smidge behind Cuatrocientos Conejos in how many units they'll sell, but in terms of the margin they deliver to the retailer, it's going to be significantly more. That's a great formula. And they're taking that and they're being really thoughtful about, okay, we've built these parameters, we've proven the success model. Let's take it and see how we can replicate it in this one other market. Okay, let's take it and see if we can replicate it in this one other market. They're not running before they're walking, right? They're being incremental. They're being thoughtful. They have healthy growth. When we look at what they're doing on spend to support this growth, it's one of the rare instances where we've looked at a brand and said, they could actually afford to spend more on their marketing. They have room in their margin and in their budget to actually amplify, but right now they don't need to. They're in a very healthy growth mode and they're delivering. So let's let them cook and see what happens here, because this thing, like I said, it's got that magic.
I love it, and talked a lot about in the newsletter. You got to sell to the consumer. You also have to sell it to the distributor. And then there's this third element, especially if you're the founder of one of these brands. Hey, do I eventually want an exit to come out of this? Do I want to have a return on all this capital that I brought in, that I brought investors in for? And so you have this third party that you're building a brand for, and it's your eventual acquirer. Does it fit in the white space of what's already out there? Then you've got a brand like Madre and this deepen before you broaden that I love. The acquirer has brought, they have the distribution footprint. If you come to a party with an expert chef and you bring your own homemade taquitos, you're not adding any value to them. But what they are looking for is that share of wallet. They are looking for the consumer's passion, like a resonance. They do want it to move off the shelves. So you're moving off the shelf a lot in every store you're in. I have a lot of stores. That math looks really good. That's why I put a revenue multiple on paper. If you're in 50 states and you say, well, not selling much, but we're in 50 states, I'd say, well, I'm in 50 states and 200 countries. What are you adding to me? And so that's another really important piece I think a lot of brands miss. And brands like Madre, lots of great brands really notice, and why it's important to have those stats matter in the markets you're in.
Yeah, I think you've done a really good job on your newsletter, which I read every week. It's great. It's both fun and super informative. And one of the things you've done a really good job informing on is differentiating volume. All volume is not created equal. If you're selling 1,000 cases in 1,000 retail points of distribution, that's worth a lot less than if you're selling 1,000 cases in 10 points of distribution. Same revenue numbers, very, very different metrics if you're a supplier looking to buy that brand. One of the biggest value adds that a supplier brings is their ability to immediately funnel you into their distribution system, put you into their distributors, get the distributors behind it, put you everywhere. You don't need to be everywhere. In fact, you probably shouldn't be everywhere. You want to leave that meat on the bone so that if you get acquired, then that is a turnkey that the supplier can do for your brand. And one of the things No Sleep Beverage has as part of we call it our proprietary KPI scorecard, is that we actually work with our brands to develop a playbook. We test and measure, we quantify as much as we can, and we figure out what is repeatable. So when it comes time for exit, we can deliver this playbook to the acquirer and say, hey, here are the metrics that are working. Here's how we achieve those metrics. Here are the types of accounts to go after. It doesn't matter if you're in Omaha or if you're in Anchorage or if you're in Miami. You have this repeatable playbook with account types and messaging strategies and promotions and how you want to create the incentives and what the right structure is to enter the market, to saturate the market, and to win the market.
And what's the greatest fear of the buyer is that maybe the existing sales were the magic of the founder and his charisma or the story he connected or just his ability to pivot and iterate, which is just an ability they don't have. But if you put that playbook in front of them that says, hey, this is all we did. We ran this playbook that's laid out and it created these results. That's something that you can do as well.
Exactly. And I think a lot of times there's a lot of value in keeping founders on. It doesn't make sense in every instance, but a lot of times there's a lot of equity in talking about those intangibles that the founder will have. No one's going to be able to tell the story as authentically or connect as meaningfully with the consumer as the founder will. I mean, Tito's vodka is still considered a craft vodka despite doing how many millions of cases a year at this point? If you were sitting in a Total Wine and you saw someone add a bottle of Tito's to their cart and said, hey, tell me what you know about Tito's. You picked that vodka. What do you actually know about it? My guess is the person would say, oh, it's made by a guy in his garage with his dog, right? Like they still have that story. They have that equity because they built that up over so much time that even once they transcended into a behemoth of a business, I think they're the biggest spirit by volume, right? They still have this connotation of being craft, and that's incredible that they've managed to maintain that balance, and it's incredibly valuable.
The best analogy I've heard is that Tito's is Taylor Swift. Like, you just look at it and you're like, well, is it the singing ability? Is it the dancing? There's better singers, there's better dancers, and just she has found a way to become this force that is worldwide that just won't make sense. And it may not happen ever again, or it won't be something that you could solve for and replicate, but it's a really special thing to have gotten to see.
Who do you think would be more upset by that comparison, Tito or Taylor?
100% Tito. But that's because I think Tito's a cool guy in his garage with his dog.
Exactly.
Probably not a billionaire on a yacht. That's they've got me, and even I know the stats.
That's the magic. That's the magic.
Well, if someone wanted to, if they were kind of getting excited about spirits, they were starting to potentially buy into the importance of really understanding the trends, the quality, and honestly just the fun of learning about these things, what are some great resources, channels, creators, books, or whatever that you'd point to someone like, hey, you want to learn about spirits, about this world, about the history of it, where should they go?
Oh, man, that's difficult. I mean, I think there's so much just like Whiskeygram at this point. If you just wanted to go on Instagram and learn, I'm trying to think, like Robin Robinson's book is a great place to start to get kind of a primer. Paul Arnold, if you want to get really deep. Dave Broom, if you want to go into the Scotch side of things. If you want to go really deep on the Scotch side of things, Charlie McLean, and talk about a guy who he's tried everything. I mean, he has tried the rarest of the rare. He is like, I think he's an OBE in the UK, one of the honorifics that the Royal Court gives to significant British individuals. And his whole life is just dedicated to the Scotch industry. If you go out and go drinking with Charlie McLean, which I have, you know what he orders? Johnny Walker Black. The man has tried every whiskey under the sun. There's probably whiskeys that he's one of like 5 people who have ever tried, and he'll just order a Johnny Black because he loves it. So talk about being able to find the product that just fits the right mood. But other books that I can think of, I guess it would also depend if you're looking at it from the consumer side or from the or from trying to enter on the entrepreneur side. I'm in the middle of reading right now What's Inside the Bottle. It's written by the former chief marketing officer for Seagram's, And it's just a bunch of his insider stories of a 30-year career in the industry and what people did right, what people did wrong, what people did crazy. If you want to laugh and if you want to just see how absolutely insane the industry has been, that is a phenomenal place to start. I'll say, I was reading it a bit this morning. I didn't even realize DISCUS, the Distilled Spirits Council of the U.S., prohibited marketing spirits to women until 1987. That is shocking. And
Wow.
it's so
That's
sad.
pretty recent.
Yeah. That's way too recent.
Oh, man.
Way too recent.
Well, wanted to ask, and thank you for spending some time with me, but is No Sleep actively raising for a fund right now? Kind of where are you guys in your cycle with that?
We're not actively raising at the moment. We are still sourcing some deals. We're working through a couple potential investments at this point. We also have a couple in the pipeline that we'd like to fill out. We're kind of trying to get this fund to a portfolio of, 8 or 10 brands total. We are also at the same time looking ahead at what might come next and looking at a larger vehicle, but we'll keep that one a little bit backstage for the time being, and maybe the next time I come on, we'll have more to share there.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate it. And dude, thank you so much for hopping on here, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, and to the listeners, sorry if I ranted and rambled a little bit. Hopefully it was informative, educational. And Bubba, I think it's about time we both go pour ourselves a drink.
It sounds right about. It sounds like my baby's crying too, so I need to.
Good luck with that.
If you'd like to get in touch with Charlie or anybody at the No Sleep team, feel free to send an email to eyesopen@nosleepbeverage.com, and I'll include that in the description.